When my son finally knocked on my door after 20 years, I didn't set run to open it. I just sat there staring at that same white door I'd painted 3 times over the years, my hands trembling, my heart caught somewhere between relief and fear. For 2 decades, I'd dreamed of that sound, a knock. Just like that. I didn't know if I was ready to face the person on the other side. But when it finally came, it's strange how time changes the way you feel about things. That door used to be a symbol of hope for me. Every time I heard footsteps on the porch, I'd let glance at it every time a car drove by, thinking of how long I'd been waiting for someone who never came home. Now, it felt like a quiet reminder. I remember whispering to myself, "Don't that cry, Alara, just listen." Because sometimes, after all the years and all the silence, a mother sits, tears simply run out. I wasn't set the perfect mother. I know that. My name is Alara, and this is the story of how I lost my son long before I ever found him again. I raised him on my own after my husband passed away when our boy was just 9 years old. But I did my best. God knows, I did. We lived in a small town in Indiana, and where the smell of coffee and cornbread filled the kitchen every morning, in a house that creaked when the wind blew, it wasn't that much, but it was home. Every night before bed, he'd hug me tight and say, he used to call me Mama in that soft, sweet way only little boys do. And I sut laugh. Don tut, worry, Mama. I sult take care of you when I grow up. Thinking how grown up he sounded for such a small boy. But we had each other, and that was enough for me. We didn't yet have fancy things. Things started to change when he became a teenager. He wasn't step my little boy anymore. He stopped sitting on the porch with me in the evenings. He stayed out late, the kind that didn't fit inside a small town life, and began talking about bigger dreams. Spent more time with his friends. I tried to understand. I told myself, he just needs space. He shall come back around. But something deep inside me knew. You don't that get it, Mom. You zip never been anywhere. He started saying things like, he was already halfway gone. Or, I can stay here my whole life. I sut smile and pretend those words didn't det hurt, but they did. Not because he was wrong, but because I could feel him slipping away from me. He didn't know I was awake. One small sentence at a time. Then one night, I heard him talking on the phone. I could tell from his voice. He was planning to leave. I stood there, barefoot on the old wooden floor, holding my breath so he wouldn't hear me. He was saying something about Chicago, a job and a friend who could help him get started. The next morning, over breakfast, he told me himself, Mama, I got a chance to work in the city, he said. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to prove anything to me. It's such a good opportunity. It'll send money. You'd be proud of me. I wanted to tell him I was already proud. But I could see the fire in his eyes. The first year after he left was the hardest. The kind that belongs to someone ready to chase the world. A car slowing down near the house. Every sound made me think he was coming home. Footsteps on the porch, even the mailman's sips knock. Each one made my heart jump. But it was never him. People told me, you should go visit him, Alara. He set's probably just busy. But I didn't yet even know where he was. He never gave me an address, just said, it's set's temporary, Mama. I sut let you know once I settle. That once I settle turned into years. I worked part-time at the library then, shelving books, dusting shelves, listening to the hum of the heater on cold afternoons. It was quiet work, but that sep's what I needed. Something to fill the silence. Something that made the days move forward. Boys with the same messy hair, the same curious look in their eyes, even when my heart stayed stuck in the same place. Sometimes I sud see young men walk in, and I sut almost say his name. For a second, my breath would catch, but then they set turn, and it wouldn't set be him. It never was. That kind of moment wears on you. The almost, the maybes, the not quites. I remember one day, a college kid came to the counter. He smiled and said, you remind me of my mom. And I couldn't even reply, because my throat had already closed up. I just nodded. By the third year, the loneliness had settled into something familiar. Not on the phone, but out loud. I read to talk to him sometimes. Like a coat I didn't like, but had learned to wear. To the empty house. Hey, Sam. It'd stay while setting the table. I made your favorite tonight. You sucked laugh if you saw me burning the garlic again. I hope you set warm wherever you are. I baited whisper. Or sometimes, while watching the sunset through the living room window, Sammy when he was little, I didn't even notice when I started calling him Sam again. It used to be Samuel when I was upset. Then, one winter, a letter came. But after a while, it just became Sam, like a memory you stop fighting against. It wasn't het from him. It was from a woman. Her name was Martha, someone I too had never met. She wrote that she'd met Sam years ago in Chicago, as if she didn't want to upset me more than she already had to. The handwriting was neat, almost careful. They'd been close for a while. Different jobs, small apartments. He had moved around a lot. Nothing stable. She wrote, "He spoke of you often, Alara. He said he couldn't come home yet." And then she said something that made my chest tighten. He said he hadn't done enough to make you proud. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. He thought he had to become someone worthy. He thought he had to earn my love before he could walk back through that door. But he was wrong. He always was. He didn't yet have to earn anything. He already had it. That winter, I started writing letters to him. I didn't Tad have his address, but I wrote them anyway. About the way the lilacs bloomed too early. I did write about the garden I planted that spring. About how the radio still played his father's favorite songs. Not because of what he did. I had to tell him how proud I was, but because he was my son. Every letter ended the same way. Come home whenever you set you're ready. I said I'll be here. I never mailed them. I kept them in a wooden box under my bed, tied with an old blue ribbon. Over time, that box grew heavy, filled with words he never got to read. Years went by. Friends passed away. Neighbors moved. And life kept shrinking in little ways. The grocery store closed. The post office moved 2 towns over. And suddenly, I was the only one left on our street who remembered how things used to be. Sometimes I slept to think about selling the house, moving closer to my sister in Ohio. That thought alone was enough to make me stay. What if he came back and didn't find me? But I couldn't stet. Polite, quiet. One day, a man came to fix the heater. He looked young, maybe 30. He noticed a photograph on the mantel. He said, "Is that your son?" Me holding Sam as a boy, both of us smiling. "He looks like a good kid," he said kindly. I nodded. And before I could stop myself, I replied, "That was the first time I used the past tense." He was. The word was felt heavy in my mouth. It wasn't that I stopped loving him. Like a truth, I didn't want to accept. After that day, something in me shifted. But I began to understand that love doesn't always mean waiting. Sometimes, love just means remembering kindly. It gave me something to do. I started volunteering at the church pantry after that. People to talk to, faces to see. There was a woman there named Grace, older than me, gentle with tired eyes. Bread, milk, canned soup. And she tell me stories about her grandkids. We pack boxes together. "Do you have children, Alara?" One afternoon, as we were closing up, she asked. I froze for a second. Then I said, quietly, "I do, a son. I haven't seen him in a long time." She nodded, as if she understood more than I had said. Then she said something that stayed with me for years. Sometimes they have to lose themselves before they can find their way back. Every season that passed, I carried that sentence with me like a prayer. I told myself I was done hoping, just in case. But every night, before I went to bed, I still looked toward that door. A mother's heart never really learns how to stop waiting, because no matter how much you try to move on, and so the years kept rolling by. I got older, quietly, slowly, until 20 of them had come and gone, became both my comfort and my cage. And that house, that quiet little house, the world got faster. I didn't know that all along. My story wasn't over yet. Because one evening, when the sky turned gold and the wind smelled like rain, I finally heard that sound again. Knock, knock. But this time, it wasn't not to dream. So I smiled and said, "Go on, son. Just don't forget to call." Even though it broke my heart, and walked out the door. He hugged me quickly, grabbed his old duffel bag, and that was the last time I saw him. At first, I waited every night, then every Sunday, but the calls never came. Then every holiday. I told myself, he settle call, he just needs time. The letters stopped coming too. Neighbors stopped asking about him. And after a while, but I never stopped waiting. I stopped talking about him altogether. Every year on his birthday, I sut baked the same chocolate cake he loved as a boy, even when there was no one left to share it with. I had sut set an extra plate on the table, 20 years, and pretend, for just a moment, that he was still sitting across from me. That's how long it took for that knock to come again. By then, my hair was white. My hands shook when I made my morning coffee. The radio still played the same old country songs, but the house felt too big, too quiet. For a second, I thought maybe I imagined it. That day, when I heard the knock, I froze. But then it came again. Knock, knock. My heart raced. After all those years, I did not know if I wanted to open the door, because sometimes, or keep the past right where it was, behind me. Still, I stood up. Even hope feels dangerous. When Yusuf lived with silence long enough, and rested my hand on the knob, walked slowly to that door, and in that small, trembling moment, I was waiting for closure. I was not waiting for my son anymore. I realized something I had never said out loud. It was a Friday evening when it happened. Gray clouds, the smell of rain in the air, the kind of evening that feels heavier than it should. I was sitting in my old armchair, the world slowing down just enough to make you remember the things you tried to forget. A cup of tea gone cold beside me when I heard it. Knock, knock. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, or maybe a delivery driver who got the wrong address. Nobody came here anymore, not for years. But then, something about that knock. It was slow, hesitant, almost familiar, like someone testing whether they still had the right to be here. I froze. The sound of it hitting the porch roof in uneven rhythms. I could hear the rain starting to fall harder outside. My hands gripped the arms of the chair. And now, when the moment finally came, all those years of waiting, for a long moment, I couldn't move. Finally, I got up, slowly, carefully. I couldn't even stand. My knees ached. I wasn't the woman I used to be. As I walked toward the door, the old floorboards creaked under my steps. Another knock, softer this time. I reached out and rested my hand on the doorknob. It was cold, like the air outside. Just that one word. Mama? And then I heard a voice, low, uncertain. And in that instant, barely louder than the rain, 20 years dissolved into a single breath. He stood there, older, thinner, his face lined in ways that life can only carve through time and regret. I opened the door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes, those same brown eyes I used to know, looked tired, searching, afraid, as if we were both trying to recognize what time had left behind. We just looked at each other. He was wearing an old denim jacket, faded at the elbows, a small backpack slung over his shoulder. His hair was streaked with gray. Not much, just enough to remind me how long it had really been. Hi, Mama, he said again, his voice cracking in the middle. I didn't answer right away. Words didn't come easily. There were too many I wanted to say, and none that felt right. Stepping aside slowly. So I just nodded, looking past me into the house. He hesitated. Come in, Sam. Then he stepped inside. The same house he left as a boy. The same walls, the same smell of coffee and cedar. The air felt heavier. Not tense, just full. Full of all the things we hadn't said for 2 decades. He stood by the doorway, looking around like he wasn't sure where to begin. His eyes landed on the photograph above the mantel. You kept it, he whispered. Of course, I said softly. Why wouldn't I? He nodded, swallowing hard. There was an awkward silence. His eyes glistened, but he turned away before the tears could show. The kind that feels like you see her standing on a bridge. Finally, I said, that might break if you take one wrong step. He hesitated again. You must be tired. Sit down. Then took a seat at the kitchen table. The same spot he used to sit at for breakfast, swinging his legs as a boy, asking for pancakes on school mornings. Now, he just sat quietly, staring at the table like it held all the answers. His hands clasped together. I turned to make tea. It's funny how habit takes over when emotion can't. Just to give my hands something to do. Boil water, 2 cups. Sugar, stir. He looked up for a second, then gave a small, tired smile. I placed the mug in front of him. I remember everything, I replied quietly. Still tea with sugar, he said. You remembered. He looked down again. There was a long pause. That smile faded as quickly as it came. Only the sound of the rain filled the space between us. His voice low, rough, like it hadn't been used for honest words in years. Then he finally spoke. I didn't sit think you Pete ever knock, I said. I didn't set think you one open the door. He exhaled, a soft, painful sound. Half sigh, half laugh. I watched him. I deserve that. The way he rubbed his palms together nervously. The way his shoulders slumped forward. He looked like a man who had carried too much for too long. You don't have to explain anything, I said quietly. But he shook his head. Yes, I do. You deserve that much. He took a deep breath, then started speaking, slowly, carefully. I thought I'd make something of myself, he said. You know, with something to show you. I thought I'd come back here, proud. But life doesn't such work that way. I made mistakes, Mama. So many. He paused, his voice trembling just a little. I moved from one job to another, one place to another. I kept telling myself, fear just a little longer. Once I get things right, I shall go home. But then, more time passed, and the longer I stayed away, I didn't interrupt him. The harder it got to come back, I just listened. Because that sets what mothers do, even when every word feels like a small cut. He looked at me then, eyes searching for something, forgiveness maybe, or just a sign that I still saw the boy he used to be. I didn't call because I was ashamed, he said quietly. I didn't send money because I didn't have any to send. I couldn't even afford the bus home some years. And then, after a while, I just told myself you were better off without me. A dry, empty laugh. He laughed softly. That sep's the lie I kept telling myself. I could feel my throat tighten. I wanted to reach out to touch his hand. But something held me back. The years between us sat like a wall, made of everything we never said. I used to dream about this house, he continued. About walking through that door again. I wake up in some cold apartment, and for a second I think I could hear you in the kitchen. He looked up. You were always there, even when I wasn't. His voice barely above a whisper. I took a slow breath. It was hard to find words. I never stopped thinking about you, Sam, not once. I know, he said softly. I just didn't know how to face you. Another silence settled between us. Not angry, just heavy. Like two people standing at the edge of something they both built and can't quite tear down. Then, almost to himself, he said, You look older. And that was the first time we both smiled, small, sad, and honest. We sat there for a long time, just letting the silence breathe. So, do you, I replied. There was something peaceful about it, in a strange, fragile way, and all that was left was the sound of rain. Like the world had finally stopped spinning. I kept studying his face, and the faint ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall, trying to piece together the man sitting in front of me, his laughter echoing across the summer evenings, with the little boy who used to run barefoot through the yard. He caught me looking and smiled faintly, though his voice still trembled a bit. You've got your father such eyes, I murmured. What? He said, almost teasing. I know, I said, but it's such true. He chuckled softly. I used to hate hearing that. He nodded slowly. A quiet sadness crept back between us, and the smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. He glanced around again, his first baseball glove, his eyes landing on the shelf by the window, the one filled with small keepsakes, a chipped ceramic mug he made in 5th grade. He got up and walked toward the shelf, and the high school photo I never took down. I remember this day, he said softly. His fingers brushed lightly over the old glove, then lingered on the photo. You made me wear that awful sweater. It was freezing, I said with a small laugh. I was trying to keep you warm. He turned to me then, like he was seeing more than just the objects. His eyes softer now. He was seeing the time we lost, and the mother he left behind. You never changed a thing, he said. I smiled sadly. I couldn't stet. It felt like, if I kept it the same, maybe you'd walk in one day, and it would still feel like home. His breath caught. I saw him swallow hard, his head bowed, hands trembling slightly. Then he sat back down at the table. Mama, he began slowly, I left because I was angry. I didn't just leave because I wanted to find a better life. The words came out heavy, like they had been sitting in his chest for years. I blamed you, he said, for everything that happened with Dad. For making him leave? For the nights you cried when you thought I couldn't hear? I closed my eyes for a moment. The sound of the rain outside seemed to grow louder. He continued, his voice shaking now. I was young, stupid. He told me things that made you look like the enemy. And I believed him. I thought I was choosing him. So when I packed my bags that night, I didn't then realize I was choosing loneliness. He laughed quietly, a broken kind of laugh. Turns out, I lost both of you. I took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly as I set them on the table. I never wanted you to choose, I said softly. Your father and I, we made mistakes. We were both stubborn. You shouldn't have had to carry that weight. But you were a child, Sam. His eyes glistening, raw. He looked up at me then. I should come back sooner. I nodded gently. Yes, you should have. But I understand why you didn't stut. I smiled faintly. You do. He blinked, surprised. Shame is a powerful thing. It can keep you from the very people who would forgive you the most. Though it hurt to do so. Just sat there. He didn't say anything. His fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the mug, his eyes distant. After a while, he said quietly, I used to call the house. A few times, years ago, I fold hang up when you answered. I looked at him in surprise. He nodded. You did. Yeah, just to hear your voice. You set, hello. And I set just freeze. I didn't know what to say. Then I set hang up and sit there feeling like a fool. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt a tear roll down my cheek. He noticed too, but he didn't and for a second he looked like he might reach out. Instead, he said softly, I thought maybe you moved on. Maybe you found peace. I shook my head. You were my only child. A mother doesn't just move on from that. He looked around again, at the framed memories of birthdays, graduations, family dinners long gone. Then he asked something I wasn't expecting. Hate, I repeated, shaking my head. Do you hate me, Mama? I took a deep breath before answering. No, I never hated you. I was angry, yes. Heartbroken, often. But hate? No, son. I couldn't hate you, even if I tried. He lowered his head. When he finally spoke, his shoulders shaking just slightly. His voice was almost a whisper. I drank too much. I hated myself for a long time. Lived in places I shouldn't have. There were nights I thought about coming home. But I didn't want you to see me like that. His confession sat heavy in the air. I wanted to tell him it was okay. But part of me knew it wasn't Not really. Some wounds don't just disappear with time. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The porch light reflected off the puddles in the driveway. 20 years, I said softly. That's a long time to carry silence. He nodded. I know. You missed your father's funeral, I added quietly. He winced, the guilt flashing across his face. I know, he whispered. I heard about it too late. And maybe I was too scared. I wanted to come, but I couldn't afford the ticket. I turned back toward him. You think time makes fear go away, but it doesn't, I said. It just buries it deeper. He nodded slowly. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, he said after a moment. His eyes fixed on the table again. I came because I couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. Not knowing what? I asked. If you were still waiting, he said simply. Something inside me broke a little then. But in quiet sorrow, I realized how much both of us had lost, not in anger, trying to protect ourselves from pain. You don't need to ask for forgiveness, I said. I walked back to the table and sat across from him. I already gave it, years ago. I just never got to tell you. He looked up at me, his expression fragile, like a man hearing a language he'd forgotten how to speak. You forgave me? He asked softly. Yes, I said, because I had to. He stared at me for a long moment. Otherwise, the waiting would have eaten me alive. But no words came, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something more. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. The air felt lighter now, not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. He rubbed his face with his hands, then said quietly, I don't expect you to let me stay. I know I don't deserve that. To know I made it through. I just wanted you to see me, studying the man he had become. I looked at him for a long time. You can stay for the night, I said softly. The guest room is clean. It's still yours. He hesitated. I don't want to intrude. You want stet, I said. It's stet's just one night. He nodded slowly. Thank you. I got up to make up the bed in the small room down the hall. He followed me, quietly watching. His presence both comforting and unfamiliar. As I spread the old quilt across the mattress, I could feel him standing in the doorway. This used to be my room, he said softly. He smiled, small, weary. Yes, I replied. Still is, in a way. I can believe you kept it like this. I couldn't bring myself to change it, I said. It made me feel like you might walk in any day. He nodded slowly, then took a deep breath. Good night, Mama. Good night, son, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned off the light and closed the door halfway. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the faint creak of the bed as he lay down for the first time in 2 decades. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat by the window in the living room, watching the rain turn to mist outside. In the soft light, it looked smaller than I remembered. I could see his old baseball glove on the shelf. Or maybe because time shrinks even our strongest memories. Somewhere down the hall, maybe because my hands had grown older, I heard him stir in his sleep, murmuring softly, like a child again. And for a brief moment, I let myself smile. Not out of joy, that had been missing for far too long. When dawn came, but from a quiet sense of peace, I found him sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sky turn pale gold. Didn't sleep much, he said with a faint smile. He looked over when he heard me. Neither did I replied. We sat there side by side, not touching, not talking much, just sharing the same air again after 20 years apart. But that morning, there was distance still. Maybe it just makes the remembering gentler. It felt a little smaller. Maybe forgiveness doesn't erase what that's gone. And that was enough. The morning after he came home was quiet. Too quiet, almost. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, just delicate. Like the air itself was afraid to break what little peace we had found. I moved around the kitchen slowly, setting the kettle on the stove. He was still on the porch, watching the steam curl up into the morning light. Coffee in hand, eyes on the horizon. For the first time in 20 years, sitting the same way he had been before the sun came up. And yet I still felt that familiar loneliness. There was another presence in the house, like an old friend that never really leaves. I thought about waking him, about asking what he wanted for breakfast, but I stopped myself. It had taken so much for him to come back. I didn't want to rush anything now. When he finally came inside, the light had shifted, the golden warmth of morning spilling across the worn floorboards. He looked different in daylight, still older than I remembered, but there was something softer about his face now. Smells like coffee, he said quietly, but it reached his eyes this time. He smiled, a small, fleeting thing. Of course, I replied. Some things don't change. We sat down together, 2 mugs between us, steam rising and disappearing into the still air. For a few minutes, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Just sharing the same space again felt like enough. Finally, he cleared his throat. I looked up. I have to leave soon, he said gently. The words didn't surprise me. but they still stung. I figured, I said softly. You have a life now. Not much of one, he said. He shook his head slowly, then added, almost to himself, but I am trying to make one. I don't want to disappear again, he continued. I don't know what that means yet, but I don't that want to go 20 more years without seeing you. Something in my chest loosened when he said that. A quiet ache that had lived there for years felt a little less heavy. Just write once in a while. Call if you can. You don't have to promise anything, I said. He nodded, eyes glistening but steady. I will. Not because he said it. I believed him, but because I could see the truth in his eyes. We finished our coffee in silence. He was a man who had learned what loneliness costs. He wasn't Set that angry boy anymore. The rain from last night had stopped completely, leaving the world washed clean and shining. Through the window, I could see the wet branches glinting in the sunlight, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. He stood and walked around the kitchen, his fingers brushing lightly against the counter. Everything's just how I remember it, he said softly. The same counter where I used to pack his school lunches. I smiled faintly. Old habits. Then his gaze landed on the refrigerator door. There were still magnets shaped like fruit, and a faded photograph tucked under one of them. Him, age 10, holding up a paper airplane, grinning with a missing front tooth. He took the photo in his hand, his thumb tracing the edges. I forgot this picture existed. I never did, I whispered. He looked at it a moment longer, then carefully placed it back beneath the magnet. It wasn't set much, but it felt like a small kind of forgiveness. He spent the next hour walking around the house, quietly taking it all in. Every room was a memory. The living room where he used to build forts out of blankets. The hallway where his height marks were still scratched into the paint. The backyard where his father taught him to ride a bike. I followed at a distance, not wanting to intrude on his remembering, staring out at the overgrown garden. He stopped at the back door for a long time. I used to think this yard went on forever, he said. It felt so big when I was little. I smiled softly. It felt big to me too back then. And for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he used to be. He glanced at me then, the same spark of curiosity in his eyes, the same warmth in his voice. But just as quickly, it was gone. Time had claimed too much of us for that moment to last. Later, as he packed his small backpack, I stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching quietly. You sure leaving today? I asked. He nodded. It goes through town and heads north. There sets a bus in the afternoon. Jeff got a job waiting. Nothing fancy, but steady. I tried to smile. That set's good. He zipped up his bag and looked around the room once more. You know, he said, I wake up thinking I could still hear your voice calling me for dinner. I used to dream about this house. I swallowed hard. I guess some dreams don't just go away. He turned then, and for the first time since he arrived, it wasn't stayed a long embrace. He stepped forward and pulled me into his arms. It wasn't that perfect, either. His arms were strong, but it was real. He smelled faintly of rain and old denim, like he was afraid I might disappear if he held on too tightly. But his touch was gentle. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, I said, and that was enough. By the time we reached the bus stop, the sky had cleared completely. The world looked fresh, the kind of clean that only comes after a long, hard rain. We stood there for a while, not talking much, just watching the road stretch out ahead. He adjusted the strap of his bag. I so right, Mama, he said softly, then looked at me one last time. I smiled through the ache in my chest. I shall be here, I said. Always. He nodded, then stepped onto the bus. I watched as he found a seat near the window. He looked out, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I waved back. He lifted his hand in a small wave, and the bus began to pull away. I stood there long after it disappeared down the road. The breeze caught my hair, and somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. I wasn't crying. Not this time. There were no more tears left. Just a quiet kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't not the same kind of leaving. He was gone again, yes. This time, he hadn't walked away in anger.